Good afternoon. How you all doing? Yeah. So this talk is entitled Libraries I Wish I Knew. You might want to make sure you're in the right place. Not supposed to be at some iOS conference up the street or anything. All right, let's get started. So my name is Chris Guzman. There's my contact information. I'm an engineer at Groupon. Small little info about me, I was a Ruby on Rails developer until about a year ago when I made the switch into Android. So this talk is going to be about libraries I wish I would have known when I got started. Groupon's hiring, so if you're interested in applying, you want to chat with me afterwards, or you can view this URL. I'm happy to talk to you about it. All right, so let's get into it. So let's say you're starting a new app, or you have a feature and you're not sure which library you might want to use. Best practices, what's the community using? We're going to cover that in this talk. A lot of basic apps do similar things. Manage multiple views, we load and display images, we're getting data from an API, parsing that JSON, updating our views with that JSON, maybe persisting data to storage, and obviously starting new activities with any kind of extras. These are the libraries we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share this talk online later, and so all these libraries, this has links to all these libraries readmes, and I've also put the version in here. One thing I'm not going to do in this talk today is tell you how to set it up with your build.gradle file. I think the readmes all have really good instructions on that, no matter what your experience level is. We're just going to get into what the features of the library are and why and how you should use them. All right, so welcome to the 45-minute hackathon. I hope you all came prepared. I'm going to be building an app, and I expect you to build something the same time too. We'll just follow along with me. But we are going to make something today. So what should I make? Well, someone told me you should always make something you're super passionate about. So I think I have the right idea. I'd like to introduce you to my new app, Tasty. That stands for Tacos as a Service to You. I think you're going to love this app. It's essentially Tinder for tacos. Don't tell me you don't like tacos. I mean, I got tacos today at lunch, so I was a big fan. This is just a quick example of what it might look like. We're going to have a text view, an image view, 2 buttons, and an info button down at the bottom as well. All right, so let's get started on Tasty. First thing we need to do is set up our views, just to kind of inform the audience what we're doing here. Here's what it's going to look like. We're going to have an image view, a text view underneath that, then 3 buttons underneath that. And then if we want at the end, we might add an edit text down below so we can add some tags onto that image. All right, let's get started. So we need to use the views. And we're going to use our first library, which is Butterknife. Butterknife is a great library that lets us use annotations to allow us to write less boilerplate code. What are some benefits of Butterknife? I'm betting you've written find view by ID 1,000,000 times just yesterday. You know, when you're starting up a new activity or you have views, you've done that a lot. And Butterknife is a great library that helps reduce the amount of times we have to do that. Butterknife is great because there's no cost at runtime. All the work Butterknife does is done at compilation time, so you don't have to worry about slowing down your app for your users. And Butterknife also gives us improved view lookups, listener attachments, and any kind of resource lookups. All right, let's get into it. This is what it would look like using Butterknife in an activity. So we have this text view with the ID of description. And in the main activity, all we need to do is set a member variable and name it, so we're going to name it description. And we just use the bind view annotation and pass in the ID of that view. What Butterknife then lets us do is use that member variable anywhere throughout that activity. First, we need to make sure we call that butterknife.bind method, and then after that, we can use that member variable wherever we need to. What is Butterknife bind doing? Well, this is one example of what it's doing. Butterknife is generating code that looks up views or resources, and it saves it as a property, and in this example, it saves it as a property on the activity. So at compilation time, this is what Butterknife would be doing in this bind method. It's setting description as a property on that activity, and it's calling the find view by ID for us. So we don't have to waste any more time doing that. Now let's say you're using a fragment, and if you are, I feel bad for you. If you're using a fragment, you have to set up a little bit differently, but it's still kind of still simple. We just need to pass in the two arguments, this and the reference to the parent view. And you can also see that we have set reference to an unbinder. And the reason we're doing this is because, as we all know, fragments have different life cycles than activities. If for some reason the fragment sticks around, we might have garbage collection or memory errors because the fragment might still be holding on to the reference to those views that we've set up with Butterknife. So by calling unbinder.unbind in the destroy view, or whenever we're winding down the activity, winding down the fragment, it just sets those references to those views as null. So it frees it up from, and lets it be released when garbage collection happens. All right, really favorite thing about Butterknife is the event listeners. Let's say you need to attach an on-click listener. All you do is write a method and annotate it with the on-click annotation and pass in the ID of the view that you want that listener attached to. So for this example, I'm attaching a on-click listener to my save button. Another thing that I'm doing, which is really handy, is passing in the reference to that button to that view in that method. So what we can do is we can dynamically update that button when that event listener happens. So for this example, what I'm doing is I'm setting the text. We could do a number of things. We could set the alpha. We could hide it, whatever we need to do. Butterknife's pretty flexible too because it lets us not have to pass in the reference to the view. So when we click on the reject button, maybe I don't care about updating the view for that button anymore. So I just want to log out that the user clicked it. Or maybe I have 50,000 analytics libraries. I needed to tell all of them that the user just clicked reject. I think somebody else has the same problem I do. So right out of the box, Butterknife supports these listeners. So really handy for us to use. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just know that you can use them. So Butterknife also lets us inject resources. So let's say you have a strings file and you want to bring in a string from that strings file. All you need to do is look up that string in the strings file, pass in the ID, and you can set it as a property on that activity. We can do the same thing with drawables, with colors, or dimensions as well. And you can see in my comments here, it's a little flexible. We can send in ints for the colors and the dimension, or we can send in other properties. Really cool thing about Butterknife is grouping views together. So in this instance, I want the same thing to happen when I click on any of those buttons, the save or the reject button. So what I'm going to do is I annotate it with that on-click annotation, and I pass in that list of views. Then on that method, I've passed in the reference to that view, and I can do whatever I want to do based on that view's ID or any other property that we can access on that view. So in this instance, if you click reject, I'm just going to make a toast that says you gross. So if you say accept, we're just going to say yummy. But no matter what, I want this get next taco method to be called. So that's why I might want to bind these views together in this on-click listener. And I'm going to talk about what this get next taco method might do in the future slides. While we're talking about binding views into a list, here's another thing that we can do. We can apply a property to all the views at once. So what I've done is I've made this list of buttons, the save and the reject button, and I can change the alpha of these buttons programmatically by using the Butterknife apply method. Butterknife also lets us kind of fine-tune the behavior. If we call Butterknife apply and pass in that list of buttons, we can also pass in what we want to happen to those buttons when we use apply. So this first example is I'm disabling them. I'm setting all of them enabled to false. And the second example, what I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit more fine-tuning. I can send in this third argument, and I can change the properties of the views based on that third argument. So here what I'm doing, I'm saying set enabled based on that third argument. You could also change the color based on the ID that you might pass in, whatever you need to do. All right, so we made our get next taco method. What it's going to do is it's going to disable the buttons so that our users don't click on it twice. And then we're going to set the taco image. We don't know how to do that yet, so we're going to move on to how we're going to add pictures of tasty tacos. We're going to use Picasso for this. Picasso is a great library that lets us download images and display them into image views. Here are some of the benefits of Picasso. Picasso will automatically make the HTTP requests for you, which is really nice. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Picasso will also cache the image, so you don't have to worry about making that request again. And it's easy to crop, center, scale, any kind of work that you need to do on that image. It also takes care of downloading it off of the main thread, so we don't have to worry about that kind of networking on main thread exception. And if you are using a recycler view, Picasso works really well with recycler views as attaching to any kind of image views or unattaching whenever that view gets recycled off screen. So pop quiz, this is a bit of a rhetorical pop quiz. Which would you prefer? So when I first started looking at how to download an image, when I was first switching over to Android, I looked at Stack Overflow about how I might download an image, and I got this. And I'm using an input stream, and I'm downloading something, and if it blows up, I have a try catch in here. I mean, obviously, I made the cardinal sin of copy and pasting code off of Stack Overflow. But if I was to do this, I don't really understand what's going on here, and it seems like it's kind of messy. So no, that's not what I want to do. With Picasso, this is what we get to do with Picasso. We just pass in the context, the image URL, and the image view that we want to place it into. That's a real URL, by the way. Place kitten, all you need to do is pass in the dimensions, and it gives you a kitten of that size, like so. So Picasso is really friendly, which is really nice. Picasso gives us some really cool things also. We can set a placeholder image. So we have a resource or drawable local in the app. We can set that as a placeholder image. Since Picasso has to go and download it, while we wait, we can show a placeholder image. If there's any kind of error where the image doesn't get downloaded for some reason, we can default to showing an error, a image in case there's an error. We can fit the dimensions of the image automatically to the dimensions of the image view, which is super nice. Or we can resize it ourselves by adding in the pixels that we want to resize it down to. We can center crop it, center inside it, rotate it on its center, or if we want to rotate it at a point off its center, we can do that. And Picasso automatically fades its images in, kind of like medium.com does. So if we want to not do that, we can call no fade and don't fade all fancy like. Picasso is not just for loading images on the web. If you want to load a drawable, a file string, or a new file, you can do that all as well. Right, so now we know how to load images. This is how we might do it in our app. In our app, we might use butter knife to grab the image view, load that random taco. That is not a real URL, by the way, unless somebody makes that URL right now and really completes that in this 45-minute hackathon. So this is how we're going to set the taco image. And now what we need to do is load the next taco description. And so this is where we're going to actually make the API call to get this taco. But first we need to take a real quick detour, and we need to set up our models. And we're going to set up our models by using what the JSON will look like to inform us how we're going to set up our models. And speaking of JSON, I'm going to introduce you to our next library, which is JSON. And JSON is a library that allows us to convert JSON to a Java object and vice versa. Super nice, super friendly for us. Some benefits of JSON. We don't have to it doesn't require annotations in our classes. It's super performant and commonly used. I thought some stats where JSON handles a whole crap ton. I think that's the perfect term of information at once if you needed to. So this is our model. So this is just a plain old Java object model. So this is what our taco is going to look like when we download it from the URL. It's going to have a description string, an image URL string, a tag, and then we're also going to have this transient property of favorite. With JSON, if you label a property as transient, when you serialize it into JSON, that field gets skipped. And so then we have our constructor over there, and so that's how we can create a new taco. So this is what it will actually look like to convert a Java object into a JSON object. So we're going to take our constructor, place in the description. This is actually how I had my breakfast today, a breakfast taco. So we can pass in our description, our image URL, a tag, and we can also send in if it's favorited or not. All we need to do is grab a new instance of JSON, and then just call the toJSON method on it, and pass in that Java object. And so you can see on that third comment, that's what the JSON will look like after we serialize it into JSON. Now and you'll notice that it's missing the favorite true because we've set that to a transient property. Now let's say we need to do the reverse and we need to deserialize it from JSON into a Java object. All we would do is call the from.json method on that instance of JSON, pass in the JSON string, and also the class that it should deserialize into. And so now you can notice that yummy taco will equal an object of breakfast taco. It's going to have the same properties except the favorite boolean, as I said, because of the transient property. Benefits about JSON: any fields in your current class or your superclasses are included by default, super handy, and it supports multi-dimensional arrays. So if for some reason you're playing chess via HTTP, JSON has your back. Some gotchas with JSON: if you're serializing into a if you're serializing from a Java object into JSON, if you have a null field, it's going to get skipped. So let's take the example of a taco that maybe it's missing a tag. Tag is null. When we convert that into JSON, that key value pair in that JSON blob is not even going to show up. And if you're deserializing from JSON and that JSON has a null key value pair that doesn't match up with a property, that's going to be null as well. So let's say we download a taco JSON, doesn't have a description. The description is going to be null in the Java object. Maybe a gotcha, maybe kind of expected behavior. I'll let you choose. We can customize JSON, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, I feel, for customizing JSON. The first gotcha I said about it was serializing nulls, and it would skip over nulls and serialize into the JSON. We can actually change that by using the serialized nulls in the JSON builder. Or if we need to keep whitespace, because JSON automatically strips out whitespace by default, we can use the set pretty printing. Happens sometimes. Sometimes we work with horrible APIs. In this case, maybe we have an API that gives us back a property that's snake case, snake case, and is for some reason misspelled, or we don't want to use the name that it gives us. All we need to do is, when we write our property, tag it with the annotation and pass in the name that the web API is giving us. And then we can still use the Java object by calling this tag property instead of having to use a serialized labels property that might come back from JSON. Maybe sometimes you have to work with a custom date format. This is how you would do that in JSON. Essentially give it a date format, and when you create JSON, pass in that date format. All right, so that's enough for JSON. So now we can get into actually loading the taco description, so actually making a call to the web for that taco description. So let's get in our taco recipe from the web. In order to do that, we're going to use retrofit, not async task. If you're using async task for all of your networking, I would consider using retrofit in a nice way. Reasons why you might want to use retrofit: retrofit is type safe, has built-in support for authentication and parsing JSON into POJOs when you pass in a JSON factory. So we just talked about JSON, so we're going to pass in that JSON factory. Retrofit also supports RxJava, which is, if you didn't know, is the new hotness. I'm sure there's a talk later about RxJava. And retrofit lets us execute HTTP requests synchronously or asynchronously out of the gate. So what does retrofit look like? We need to create an interface. So I'm making my interface Taco API. And you can see here that we're going to have 4 API endpoints. We can get a random taco. We can get a list of contributors. We can get a contributor by name. Or we can post a new recipe. Let's talk about it one by one. So getting a random taco. When we want to get a random taco, all we need to do is call this random taco method, and you can see that it takes an argument of a boolean, full, true, or false. And we've annotated it with this query, full taco. What happens when you annotate an argument using retrofit is that it's going to if you annotate using the query annotation, it's going to pass that along as a query parameter to the server. So in our instance, if we call random taco true, it's going to say full taco equals true. Now you may ask me, Chris, why would you ever want full taco equals false? We all like tacos, and I like my tacos full. It just so happens with this API, if you pass in full taco true, you get like the whole description. If you get full taco false, it gives you all the ingredients, so you have to make it by hand. So that's why you would do it in this API. In our second API endpoint, you can see that it takes no arguments, and what it returns us is a list of contributors, so you can also get stuff that's a list of things, so you can iterate over that list. In this third API endpoint, we have another argument in our get contributors method, and in this case, what we're doing is we're passing in a path, a URL to the path. So what get contributors does is you pass in a contributor's name, and it tells you all the recipes that that contributor has made. So obviously you need to pass in the name into the path, so that's how that would work. You'd annotate it with path, give it the string username, and that URL with the curly braces, that part would get replaced with the argument that you passed in. And last but not least, if you need to post a JSON payload, when you annotate a method with post, you can also, in the argument, have a body annotation on an argument. And that's going to be it's going to serialize that Java object into a JSON object that will be sent up to the server. We only have two HTTP annotations, get and post, but retrofit works with all the usual HTTP verbs. So this is what it looks like to get JSON synchronously. Again, this is a real API, Taco Randomizer. What we need to do is create a new instance of retrofit, pass in the base URL, add the JSON converter factory so that it converts it from JSON to Pojo and vice versa, and build. Get an instance of that Taco API, and then we can grab an instance of this call object. And this call object is something that comes from OKHTTP and retrofit. With the call, you can make the call synchronously, asynchronously, cancel the call either while it's in working or before it even starts. Or you can also clone a call object, so you can make that same request over again by cloning an object and making a new request. So if we're going to get the JSON synchronously, we're going to execute the call. Execute means synchronously. And in a bit of a happy path here, the body should return us a taco object. Again, I suggest you do this off the main thread, or you can just work it asynchronously. So let's say we're posting a new recipe. We're posting a new recipe. All we need to do is create a new recipe, pass that into the create recipe method, and then we use the call and queue method. And what enqueue method will do is it will make the request in an asynchronous manner and gives us two callbacks, a response and a failure callback. And we can do whatever we need to do with either of those conditions. Really great tricks, and at least the first trick applies to retrofit 2, is that we can change the base URL. So if we're working for some reason with a new version, our API is versioned out and we need to make a request to a new version of the API, we can pass in the full URL and we can annotate that method. That way we don't have to we can skip the base URL. We can also add headers if we need to. So this is what it looks like in our app when we're going to get a random taco. We're going to request a random taco, and I'm going to make the request asynchronously. When it succeeds, I'm going to save the taco. When it fails, I don't care because it's a 45-minute hackathon and I'm going to keep going. So let's talk about the save taco method might work, how that might work. So when we want to save a taco recipe for later, we're going to use the, Realm. Realm is a great library that replaces SQLite for us. Here's some benefits of Realm. Realm is really easy and simple to set up. It just works by extending our models. With Realm, the models are our schema for our database. Realm was made for mobile from the ground up. A lot of queries in Realm are actually fast enough to be run synchronously. I would suggest you do some of them in an asynchronous manner, but if you'd like to live on the edge, you can run them synchronously if you'd like. And Realm also gives us support to have multiple Realm databases in one app. That's a little bit outside the scheme of this talk, but there is info online about that. So two-step process for setting up realm. First, we need to take our objects, and we need to extend from realm object. So this is the same taco object we've been working with this entire time. Pretty simple. And then to set up realm, we need to get an instance of the realm configuration and get a default instance of realm out of that. Every time you work with realm on a new thread, you need to get a new instance of realm. This is one simple example of how we might persist some object into the database. We make sure all of our data happens in transactions. The first thing that we're doing is beginning a transaction. And what realm will do is realm won't automatically manage all of your objects in memory. You need to copy it into realm, or you need to create the object from realm. So the first example is showing where, let's say we already have a taco object, we've set the description in the URL, but we want to persist it into the database. So what we would do is we'd call realm.copy to realm and pass in that object that we've already created. Alternatively, if you have a new taco object and you just want to create an instance from realm, you can use that with realm.createObject and pass in the class of the object. Then we just need to call realm commit transaction, and voila, our info is persisted into the database. What about accessing data? What if we want to get all of our liked tacos to see how many tacos never liked us back? What we can do with realm is we can ask for a realm results. Essentially what we're doing here is we're asking realm, hey realm, can you give me all the tacos that I favorited and return them to me? And it's going to return it to us in a realm results. And our realm results, we can iterate over them, we can treat them as taco objects. Another way of writing data, we can again, we need to get our instance of realm if we're in a new thread for some reason. We can use this transaction block. So what I'm doing here is I'm executing this transaction. I'm creating a new object from realm, setting the description, setting the image URL, and then when that block executes, it'll be persisted into the database. What about executing it asynchronously? We would just call the execute transaction async. Again, using our execute block, setting any kind of setters that we need to. Then realm gives us our two callbacks, on success and on error. If you need to do anything with that, that's when you can alert your users it was saved, there was an error, something like that. Pretty handy. Little known fact about tacos, they have many ingredients, unlike some of the tacos I make, which is just all meat or all lettuce. How might we have a relation between tacos? Not between tacos and their ingredients. So let's say, for instance, that a taco might have a list of ingredients. And this ingredient object is going to have a name and URL. All we need to do is make sure both of these objects extend from realm, and realm will handle how they're associated. So let's look at an example of that. Here we're asking realm, can you give me all the tacos where an ingredient's name is lime? And we're going to save that to our lime tacos, our realm result of lime tacos. So that's going to give us our list of tacos that we can iterate through. Realm gives us all our typical SQL relationships, one-to-one, one-to-many, yada, yada, yada. Realm will also give us conditions or predicates for looking up any kind of realm results. These are some examples. Feel free to research them on your own. Occasionally there comes a time in our lives where we need to delete some tacos. In this instance, we have a list of lime tacos. Maybe we use the wrong kind of lime, limestone instead of real lime, so maybe we need to start deleting some limes from our favorite list. What we can do here is in our realm transaction block, we can take this list and we can delete the first, delete the last. We can get an object via its index and delete that from realm, or we can even just delete everything if we need to. Really great thing and really nice kind of addition with realm is that we can attach change listeners onto a realm object or a realm results. So in this example, I've attached a change listener onto my list of lime tacos. So whenever something gets added or something in the list gets changed, this change listener gets called, and I have this callback. And this callback gives me this other argument, and I've named it tacos con limon. And the great thing about Realm is it auto updates objects. So we would see that once we've added something to lime tacos, we would see that the size of these two lists are the same because these two lists refer to the same Realm results. So then we can do whatever we need to do with that list of tacos. Benefits and tips for a Realm. If you, in your model, have an ID with a primary key annotation, so an ID of an integer, I think it also allows strings as a primary key, we can allow the use of copy to Realm or update, so we can update the same object in memory instead of creating new ones all the time. Realm works really nice with JSON and retrofit, which we covered earlier, so that's nice. And with the newer version of Realm, we can have custom getters and setters. In other versions before that, we didn't have that ability, so this is a really nice bonus for us. One thing you would need to make sure of when you use Realm to prevent any kind of garbage collection or any kind of weird memories, any kind of weird errors, is remove any change listeners that you have attached to a Realm object or attached to a Realm result. You can either remove the change listener if you have a reference to it, or if you'd like, you can just remove all change listeners. Also remember to close the instance of Realm on anytime you're winding down a life cycle, winding down an activity, a fragment, or some kind of thread that you might be on. Just helps prevent any errors or memory leaks. So gotchas. Realm has one really big gotcha, and I know that they're working on it, and so I look forward to the solution that they'll have in the future. But currently, you can't persist a list of strings or primitives on an object. So one example of this is my taco object had a tag string, and it was just one tag. You notice it didn't have like a list of tags. And this is because currently Realm doesn't have support for persisting that list of strings into the database. If you are downloading data from an API, you can add this JSON adapter that I've linked to, and I'll share this presentation online. So you can do that. I think another workaround is creating a new object of a string, like a Realm string. I think I saw that also. So that's one gotcha that Realm has. But Realm's constantly in development, so I look forward to the fix that they have for that. You also need to remember that if you are saving data to Realm, if you're getting it from an API, you copy that object from memory into Realm. You use that copy from Realm instance. And if you are working with large data sets or complex queries, you should make sure that you run those on the main thread. All right, so last but not least, we're going to start a new activity. We've been at this hackathon for 30-something minutes, and we're still on one activity, so let's make our next activity. We're going to use Dart and Henson. Dart is the name of the library. Dart's really nice because it's inspired by Butterknife, and we use Dart a lot at Groupon, which is really nice. Dart is a way to inject intent extras as a property onto an object. So when you're starting a new activity, and you want to pass along these extras on the intent, you can retrieve it easily with Dart. Just like find view by ID, I am sure that we've spent a lot of time wasted by writing stuff like intent, put extra, key, value, get int extras, get string, pass in the key. You know, we've always had to go back and find what the key is, set it as a method somewhere, a variable somewhere, a constant. So Dart and Henson kind of remove all that headache. And Henson gives us a readable domain-specific language for passing extras onto the intent. So let's talk about it in two parts. First, we're going to talk about Dart. This is what it looks like with Dart, grabbing extras from an intent. Looks a little bit like Butterknife. We have these four extras: favorite, description, tag, and ingredient. Let's talk about the first two. So we've annotated these extras with these properties on this activity with the annotation inject extra. If you just leave this annotation the way it is, inject extra, if these extras on the intent are null when the activity starts, you'll get an exception thrown. So we expect that this activity starts with extras such as the Boolean favorite and the description, the description string. However, if you want to make those extras an optional field, we can just use this nullable annotation. So our app will not blow up, and we'll be fine if the other activity doesn't send in any kind of extras on the intent. We can also set a default a default value. So for this tag, if we do not send in a tag as an extra on the intent, we can default it to taco, just in case you forgot that we were talking about tacos. We can also inject an entire model, as long as that model implements parcelable. And Dart will handle unwrapping that and setting that as a property on this activity. So once we use Dart inject, we can start using those member variables that we've defined. Right, so now how would we go about setting these extras on the intent? This is what we can use Henson for. Henson will automatically look up every activity that has that inject extra annotation and make this go-to blank method for us. It's automatically generated for us. Henson will also look up to see which extras has that inject extra annotation and use those as setters on this intent that we're creating. So here you can see that we're passing in, it's a favorited, passing in the description of the taco, maybe a new ingredient, and we can build that. You'll notice I left off the tag. So if we had set the tag as a nullable injected extra, then it would just be null. However, since we set it as a default value, it's going to default to taco when we start that activity. So we just kick off that activity with that intent, and we're off to the races. What if you want to use Henson without injecting any extras? All you need to do is annotate your activity with Henson navigable. One small gotcha, if you're using ProGuard, make sure you add these rules. Again, that's a link that I'll post this online. You can check that out. All right, so let's see, is that it? Do we have any more methods to implement? Looks like no. So I think we've created our Tinder for tacos. Here's a list of libraries that we used and what they did. Again, this has links to that. Before I finish, I would like to say a very strong thank you to my mentor, Cody. He helped me a lot with this presentation, so I'm really appreciative of his help. If you have any questions, or if you want to reach out to me, my contact info is there. Or if you have any questions for me now, I can take some now. Thank you. Yeah. So the question is, how does Realm know when you've added something to an object? That change listener. Is that the right question? Yeah? So if you're updating an object that Realm already has, how does Realm know to update that existing object that already has persisted in the database? You would use the ID annotation when you have your object. So in one of the slides, you can basically have your model have a unique ID, same thing that we might do with SQL. And so then what we can do is we can look up that Realm object by ID using the conditions that I shared in there, and then you can update that specific Realm object. So once you've looked it up by ID, you can update it and commit that transaction, and then it would find that one in that database. So how does Realm handle a new property that you're assigning onto a model? I actually don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, the answer is that Realm provides you with a Realm migration, and there is documentation for that online, so you can look that up. You can check that out there. What is a Finish app? It's a hackathon. It's vaporware. Nothing ever gets actually finished at a hackathon. We just talk about it. Actually, I think that's the next step of this talk. I'm going to publish it up to GitHub when I publish this talk. I didn't finish the actual Finish app, so when I do finish it, I'll push it up to GitHub. Maybe I'll get to it around Christmas, like Chet. Any other questions? Have I used what as opposed to Realm? I have not used Cupboard as opposed to Realm. I have not. I've known people use other alternatives such as Firebase, and I know there's a lot of differences between Firebase and Realm. Firebase does NoSQL and handles syncing up to the cloud. Realm's kind of more focused on just SQLite, but I guess I should check out Cupboard. That's one library I should check out. Anything else? No? I'll be in the back if you have any more questions. Thank you all very much.